Hey, this is Brandon with Lady and the Lineman, and today I want to cover a couple of different techniques that I've found to achieve a darker engraving on wood, specifically while laser engraving. If you are struggling and achieving engravings that look like this, or even like this, and you're actually shooting for something like this, then in this video I'm going to go over a couple of different settings and a couple of different steps that I've found that really play a huge role in actually achieving this. So stick around and let's laser engrave some stuff. So being that my drawing skills currently don't exist, I purchased some images from Etsy, and it also supports other artists that are a little more skilled on that side of it. So I bought a couple of Predator and Xenomorph SVG files, and I choose SVGs generally over any other file because you can customize them more. You can break them apart, you can change things to be shaded, not shaded, you get it. So once you download those and they're in whatever folder you have, chances are you have to unzip them. And to do that, you just have to right click on it and go to extract all. And you can choose a folder. I usually just leave it in whatever folder it is and move it later. So once you have that, we can go ahead and open up Lightburn and then import them from whatever folder you were just working out of. So the first image I'm going to bring up is the Predator, and that's going to be the centerpiece. And if we were to go ahead and engrave it as is right now, this is what it would look like. Obviously your settings are going to matter, but that's what the image looks like as of right now. And actually that's how we're going to leave it. We're going to play with some fonts and different things like that, but that image is pretty good how it's set. So, as you saw in the beginning, I have named this restaurant Predator's Pub. So I'm going to start out with the generic font that I already have on my computer, and then I'll show you how to get a specific font. And I really like making these boards. I don't know, I really like horror stuff, so it's fun to get creative with different restaurants and things like that. So if you're interested, go check out our Instagram and you'll see the other ones we've made. So I'm going to go ahead and look up the Predator font, and there's a couple that I'm looking for right now. So I want the movie font, and then I also have an idea for for the Predator font. So I'm going to go ahead and download those, also to my downloads folder, so everything's in one spot while I'm working on this project. And once you have that downloaded, you can open up that folder, and then you're going to open up the true font file. So go ahead and install that font, and you're going to want to do the same for any other fonts that you're going to use for this project. And you don't want to do them one at a time. You can, but it could be a pain in the butt. You'll see why. So being that Lightburn was open, I can't use the fonts that I just installed. So what I'm going to do is select the whole image, cut, and then close Lightburn, and then just reopen it. Go ahead and paste your image back, and we are back to square one, except for now we have new fun fonts. So select whatever font you want to change, and then I'm going to go down to the Predator movie font. So personally, this is my favorite part of the process, just because you get to really make the project yours. If you're someone that copies and pastes stuff, that's totally cool too, but I challenge you to try and make something yourself, and I bet you probably will have a lot more fun doing it. But hey, either way, as long as you're engraving something and having fun, and not lighting things on fire, that's also looked down upon. Try not to do that. So this is where I'm incorporating the Predator font, the one that they actually use in the movie on their little armband things. Other nerds will get it. I'm not even going to tell you what that says either. So here you can just kind of move things around to where you feel they fit. I'm going to be doing a circular piece, so I have to somewhat keep to that shape, or you're going to have to start changing the scale of other things. Something else to note when working with font is you can change the horizontal and vertical spacing. So if it looks like a word won't fit with the font you want to use, mess with that before you actually change the complete size of it. Because you might be able to squish the letters together vertically or horizontally just to make it work. And here I'm actually going to use one of the Boolean functions to add the word pub to the predator. I want the pub word to be in front of the predator's braid. Something like that. So I'm just moving these words to this left side. And as I'm going through, I'm aligning things slowly. You can just kind of rough estimate where you want everything and then align it, but I've gotten pretty used to just aligning each element of my piece kind of one by one. And then at the end I'll go through and make sure everything's aligned, but that's just how I've learned to do it. And as I'm going through, I periodically will just check what the preview looks like, because you never know when you accidentally mix or boolean something or weld something, and then you have to go way back through the process to fix that. And then I decided that the and B should be a different font, just to kind of break it up a little bit. So looking at it, I like the design, but there's going to be a lot of fill. And so that's going to be a lot of charring. So one way that I kind of combat that is to use outlines. So there's definitely some wording and things like that in this design that I can outline and get a pretty similar result as if it was filled, but with a lot less char. So what I'm going to do is outline the eat, drink, and be, well, I'm not going to outline the predator speak because that would look funny. But I'm going to outline the eat, drink, and be, so you'll see that. And I don't do a super thick outline on something like this just because I moved the lettering closer together and it would all blend into almost like a sticker if I was to make it much bigger than I did. There, so now it'll look something like that. Alright, so I think that side looks good. So now I'm going to bring in the Xenomorph SVG I got. And this one is going to kind of balance it out on the right side. So I'm going to do an anti-Xenomorph, and that's a really simple symbol to make on this. You don't need to go and download one. Just do a circle, and then you're going to do an inner outline. You could do an outer one too, but for me, an inner one just seems easier. And what you want to do is remember how thick that outline is going to be, and then you're going to make a line that thick, just so everything's uniform. If you need to, unlock that line so you can stretch it out. And you're going to make it pretty much the inner diameter of that, and then we're just going to rotate it. And then you're going to do that Boolean function. I'm not even going to try and pretend I know which one it's called, but it's that one. And there you go. Now you have an anti-Xenomorph sign. Again, I'm going to spooling, weld, whatever it is. I should definitely remember those. But I'm going to do that to these two images, and then that's going to make one single SVG or image for that. And there we go. So I have no real set scale for that, so you can just eyeball things like that. And that's the fun part about this, is really there's no right and wrong way. It could look great to you, terrible to someone else, or vice versa. But you know what? This one's going to be cool. So again, just do your random checks just to make sure things aren't completely out of alignment. So far that's looking all right. So one element I always add to these pieces is the year that movie came out. So this one, 1987, so Predator's Pub has been around since 1987. So now that I have a rough draft of what the board's going to look like, now I'm actually going to put in a circle that represents the board that I'm making. So in this case, it's 11-inch radius. So I'm going to put an 11-inch circle on the board. And with that, it actually gives me a better idea of where things can sit. So, like the origination date, that's going to now move to the bottom. And then we got to add the home planet, and we'll put that right above the origination date. By the way, if you're screaming at me right now because I messed some kind of lore up on this, you're more than welcome to let me know in the comments. It won't hurt my feelings. Not much. Side note, if you get a random idea that would change the whole piece that you just worked on, don't change the one you just worked on. Select the whole thing and make a copy and bring it over to the side and then play with that one. Because just like in this example, I thought I had a good idea, but I ended up liking the first one better anyway. So had I gone back and changed a bunch of stuff, that would have sucked. Okay, so now that we've made a design, we're going to get ready to actually engrave. So You can mess with the way that the laser actually engraves this image, whether it's all in one piece, if you're doing groups together, if you're doing individual shapes, and that's going to change the amount of time it takes. But it's also going to change how fast your laser moves in certain areas. And if it's moving too quick or shaking, it can move your material around or just not create a clean image.
But that'll take you most of a year and cost you twice what you're owed.
Yeah, it's legal.
It's a law.
Yeah, at least see my.
I think he's Marine Corps Martial Arts NCMAP.
Damn far from here. You enter this town again. Go another route.
Something's up. Chief is willing to.
These cops might end up on top of you, but they don't get any more outs.
So one step that I actually missed for quite a while was sanding my piece before I actually engraved it. I've generally sanded after just to get rid of any kind of scorch marks or any kind of extra debris or anything like that. But for a long time, I was curious why I wasn't getting an even burn on something that seemed flat. Especially when you buy a blank, for instance. It seems flat, you could put something on it, and to the naked eye, it is flat. But to a laser, it's not that flat. So another reason it's good to sand these things before you engrave it is a lot of the time you're gonna have some form of oil or a finish, something to treat this so that the end user doesn't have a dry cutting board. So we're going to sand that off. And by doing so, we're actually going to create a much more even surface for the laser to hit, less reflection points, and no weird oil residue crap that, I don't even know what it is. So we're going to sand this, then we'll engrave it, and then we're going to sand it again to get that finished result. So I'm going to start with a 60 grit sandpaper on the random orbital sander. I'll move up to 80 and then 120 grit. And if that makes absolutely no sense to you, it is just how much grit or how rough this sandpaper is. And it actually starts at a lower number and moves up until you get into the thousands. And at that point, you're pretty much buffing stuff. So I'm going to start with a 60 grit on the random orbital sander. I'll move up to an 80 grit and then 120 grit. And that's when I'm going to engrave it. After I engrave it, then I can come in and do the finish sanding and get it, as smooth as you want from there. A lot of people finish at like 220, and that's fine. I generally go up to like 400, but it really doesn't matter that much. If you don't have a random orbital sander and none of this makes sense to you, you can also get sanding blocks. You can just buy sandpaper. The main goal here is to use something rough and get rid of whatever oils are on top of this. That's gonna suck, and honestly, having a random orbital sander to go along with your laser is definitely a benefit. But hey, you do you, boo-boo. If you wanna do that, that works. Let's make it shiny. I guess it's not gonna be shiny first. We're gonna make it like, made anti-shiny, but it's gonna be perfect laser engrave. So there is that. And we go. So I've sanded this up to 150 grit. I was actually wrong. I don't have any 120 grit. And this is a Lazy Susan that I should have tightened the screw. I say again, I should have tightened that screw. Oopsies. I think we're lazy again. Hold up. That's dumb. I didn't tighten it because I didn't think I had one. I'm like 30 feet or something from where I was when I thought that. There was one right there. It's actually two. Hey. If I would have done that, I wouldn't have had to hold it.
Assuming
while I
that you
sanded
have
it,
your
and it would've
power
been a lot
settings
easier.
somewhat where they need
So,
to be.
Back to the point.
One of the
Now
most
that this is actually a
important
very
pieces
smooth
that you're gonna
surface,
wanna
flat
pay
surface,
attention to
and it does
is
not
going
have the
to be
oils
the
in it,
line interference.
as long as I focus my
think
laser,
a
I'm
lot of
confident that
people
I can get
miss
a pretty dark
that,
burn on this.
And if you think about
Also,
it,
we're going to go
especially
over
when
some
engraving
settings
something
that
like
are
wood,
huge.
A line interval is extremely
huge,
important because that's how much time it's going to spend going
important.
over that same portion
kidding.
of material.
So now that we actually have a good piece
here
to
you
engrave
can see
on, we're
going
going
to
to go over
some
some settings
with
that will make
what
a huge difference
each
in your
setting
engraving.
will do to the elapsed time of the engraving. And it really didn't change too much aside from if I go to all in one piece, it's going to take a lot longer. But when you're looking at your line intervals, looking at like a 0.4, 0.5 on a piece of bamboo will provide a much darker engraving than say a 1 millimeter, which is the standard. So when you're doing your material tests, maybe play with that. See if you can change your interval without changing the actual speed and power settings, and just see where that gets you. For me, 0.4 seems to be pretty good, but I can get away with 0.5 on quite a few without much of a difference. Here I went ahead and measured this circle thing. My laser's pretty, I wouldn't say old, but it's not new enough that it measures for me. So, got it measured, got it ready, gonna turn on the band system, and we can go ahead and engrave.
We need a smoking gun. The big banks, the regulatory agencies, fail.
And there we have it. So, that came out pretty good. So again, we got a nice dark engraving. The engraving's deep, so if you actually wanted to paint it or fill with epoxy, I'd probably slow it down just a little bit on the laser if you were going to fill this with resin, but you could definitely do that. So aside from the charring, this thing's pretty much done. So I'm just going to touch it up with the 150. Make sure that's on there. Yep. So we're going to go ahead and touch that up with 150 grit. And then we'll move to 220.
Oh, I think my camera's gonna follow this, my bad. So you don't need to go crazy with sanding after the engraving, but also if you have an even engraving, you shouldn't have to worry about losing pieces of it when you do sand it. That was something I dealt with quite a bit before I kind of made sense of why that was happening. And obviously it makes a lot of sense. So your best bet is to start with a level bed first off, which, if I'm being real honest, mine's probably not all that level. It's pretty close, but it's definitely not super level like it should be. But it just produced this, so I don't think that's a huge issue. Look at that. That's kind of okay, distractions. One thing I did notice consistently was that I was inconsistent with my engravings on blanks, even if it was the same blank. If it was the same board, it didn't matter. And a lot of that was going to be the peaks and valleys that I couldn't see with my eye, but my laser was obviously bouncing off of. Between that, the oils, and all that kind of stuff, which makes sense. So when I've made cutting boards or other things to engrave, I naturally have to sand that when I'm done gluing it up or whatever part of the process I decide to engrave at. So that involves sanding, and I generally will get a much darker engraving on something that I made myself versus something that I bought at the store. So if you're experiencing something similar, it's most likely something to do with that. If you have air compressor or something out in your shop, like I should, you could use that, it'd be a lot better. But mine broke, so I'm back down to it, microfiber towel. But you can tell already that that cleared up a lot of the debris and stuff that was in the engraving. And we didn't lose anything, and that was actually the roughest grit we're gonna go with from here on out. So I'm gonna move to a 220. All right, so it's 220. So it's starting to get smooth now. And here's where preference starts to come in. Some people don't want a board that shines or has a glass-like texture. I think that's crazy to be able to do with wood, so that's kind of usually my goal. 20.
So again, my air compressor is not working right now, so I'm going to use the airbrush. But we're going to get rid of all of this, oil it, and then that should be it. So just go through. You can try and go in with the grain, and that tends to help, but there's dust everywhere. So just work at it for a minute, and you can see oops. As you get that out of there, you can get the contrast back from your engraving. So, yeah. So look at that. So just pulling the dust out. Changes it quite a bit. So once you've blown out the majority of the dust and whatever crap got sanded in there, should look something like this. And honestly, if you're using an air compressor, it probably looks a lot better. But it's time to go put oil. This is the best part. This is the best part. All right, so this is just basic mineral oil. It's pharmacy grade, so you can get it. I think I got it at Walmart, to be honest. I'm not sure if there's any bad kind of mineral oil, but don't trust me on that. Just make sure you're getting it from the pharmacy aisle or wherever they sell mineral oil. So this is the fun part. This is where you start to actually get the engraving, or this is where you actually start to get the contrast to your engraving. And it helps seal the wood, so it's always good. I'm gonna leave that alone. All right. So I'm gonna let this sit. Can't tell if the camera's on me. So I'm gonna let this sit for a while and soak up some of that mineral oil, and then you can wipe off any of the excess if it's there. If you are going to use this for food, I would leave it right there. No polyurethane, nothing like that, and it will still be food safe. If you're just gonna do a showpiece or something to put glasses on and you want it to be extremely shiny, dude, there's so many options. You put polyurethane on it, you can put resin on it. There's quite a few things you could do with it. I don't even know what this is gonna be yet. I just really like Predator and I wanted to make a Predator piece, so Predator's pub now exists. So it's pretty much soaked up all the oil, and I went back and dried it with a microfiber cloth. And you could still see it's got quite a shine to it. And the engraving's still extremely dark. I didn't add anything to make that darker. I know some people use borax, different kinds of pre-treatment to get an effect like that, but mixing chemicals with your kitchen stuff is just not good. Don't do that. If you don't have to. I mean, if you have to, you gotta do what you gotta do. This is an engraving I did last year. And really, I mean, it's not bad. There's nothing to complain about that. But if I'm being honest, I was shooting for something like that. And that can be frustrating. So, especially if you don't have a wood shop and you can't go back through and run this through a planer or a drum sander, something like that, that's a pain in the butt. I hope this video helped. It's really not a difficult thing to get to, and I know it can be a headache. So if you have any questions, anything like that, feel free to reach out. And until next time, thank you.